What if your neighbor's sense of entitlement could cost her more than just a parking space? Imagine karma rolling up in the form of a fire truck, sirens blaring, lights flashing, and then stopping right in front of her shiny luxury SUV. But here's the twist. It's not just any fire truck. It's a team of firefighters who, with no hesitation, smash out her car windows, all because she decided that blocking a fire hydrant was a small inconvenience. But it doesn't end there. What comes next will make you question how far entitlement can really go. The truth is, this wasn't just about parking. It was about power, respect, and a neighborhood that was fed up. Stick around to find out how one woman's arrogance turned her world upside down and made her the center of a community-wide spectacle. It's not just karma, it's a lesson learned the hard way. It started off like any normal day in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Brookage Hills, where I worked from home and my wife, June, and I were just getting settled into our new life. Our house was cozy, the kind of place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That was until Claudia Hartwell rolled into our lives, literally. Claudia was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the neighborhood's small-time ruler. As the president, she took it upon herself to enforce the most ridiculous rules. Lawn lengths, paint shades, holiday decorations, you name it, she had an opinion. But her latest action? Well, that would be the one that pushed me over the edge. It was an unusually warm morning when I first noticed it. I was in my office staring out of the window when my gaze fell on her Porsche, parked right in front of my driveway. Not just anywhere, but smack in the middle, blocking the only path to our garage. It wasn't some random visitor's car. No, it was hers, the shiny cherry red Porsche that screamed, "Look at me," louder than any car should. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she was dropping something off, or maybe there had been some sort of mix-up. But after a few hours, I noticed the Porsche hadn't moved. It was there, occupying my driveway as if it were her personal parking spot. I walked outside to see if it was really happening. Sure enough, the car was parked so close to the garage that it would be impossible to get out without scraping the side. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. The last thing I wanted to do was escalate things with the HOA president, but this was my property. I couldn't just let it slide. So, I wrote her a note, polite but firm. It read, "Hi Claudia, I noticed your Porsche is parked in my driveway. Please avoid parking there in the future as it blocks access to my garage. Thank you for understanding." It felt like the right thing to do, so I slid it under her windshield wiper and went back inside. I figured that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, the Porsche was back. And this time, it was even closer to the garage door, almost daring me to react. I couldn't believe it. Claudia had completely ignored the note I'd left her. It felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about power. She knew she could get away with it because, in her mind, she had the authority to do whatever she wanted, no matter how ridiculous. I'd like to say that I was above petty conflicts, that I'd brush it off. But that wasn't the case. Every time I tried to reverse out of the driveway, I had to carefully navigate around her car, making sure I didn't scratch the sides of her expensive vehicle. Claudia had become a fixture in our lives, but not in the way anyone wants. She was like a daily reminder of how some people treat others with absolute disregard. But it wasn't just about the Porsche anymore. It was about how someone with that much power, real or imagined, could impose her will on others without fear of consequence. I knew there had to be a solution, but I couldn't figure out how to handle it. Every time I confronted her, it felt like I was talking to a brick wall. Claudia would nod her head, give a tight, cold smile, and walk away mid-sentence. The note I'd left was already forgotten. My polite request had been disregarded, and I was left wondering how to deal with someone so relentless in her entitlement. That Porsche? It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of everything wrong with the situation. It was a reminder of how Claudia could impose her will without even thinking twice. And worst of all, she wasn't the only one. The entire HOA seemed to turn a blind eye to her behavior. The board, all hand-picked by her, was complicit in this little kingdom she'd built around herself. They weren't interested in fairness. They were only interested in enforcing the rules that suited Claudia's whims. And they did it with a smile. It became clear that the more I let it slide, the more Claudia's power over the neighborhood would grow. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I started keeping track of everything. Dates, times, photos of the Porsche parked in my driveway. I even installed a front-facing camera, capturing every little detail in case things escalated. I knew this wasn't just about parking anymore. This was about respect. It was about holding people accountable for the power they wield, and it didn't take long before I started digging deeper into the HOA rules myself. Claudia had been flaunting her power for too long, breaking rules left and right. Her prized rose bushes extended beyond regulation into the public sidewalk. Her trash bins were regularly left out 12 hours past pickup time. And as for the Porsche, well, even the HOA members were forbidden from using private property for personal parking. But of course, when you make the rules, you don't have to follow them, right? I knew I had to act. The problem was getting the board to take action was impossible. Claudia and her friends were more interested in sipping Chardonnay than dealing with real issues. I was left with no other option but to take matters into my own hands. The rules were being bent and I was fed up. Little did Claudia know, she was about to meet someone who would not back down, someone who wasn't afraid to use his own creative methods to make sure the rules were followed. It was a typical summer afternoon in the neighborhood, the kind of day where the air felt heavy and full of tension, as if the atmosphere itself knew something big was about to happen. I was sitting in my office, peering out the window at the same Porsche parked in front of my driveway, again. But this time something felt different. The heat, the frustration, the sense of impending change all built up like an electric charge in the air. Little did I know, I was about to witness something that would completely shift the balance in our neighborhood. Across the street, thick smoke started pouring from the attic of a house, twisting into the sky like a dark omen. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer and closer. The fire truck was on its way. As I watched in disbelief, I realized the nightmare that was unfolding. The fire truck pulled up fast, its engine rumbling like a beast ready to spring into action. But then the worst possible thing happened. The truck couldn't get to the fire hydrant. It was blocked by none other than Claudia's Porsche. A moment of pure panic flashed through my mind. There was no time to waste. Firefighters are trained to act fast, and every second counted. But with Claudia's car sitting there, right in the way, they had no choice but to make a quick decision. The fire captain barked orders, and in the blink of an eye, 2 firefighters rushed forward, tools in hand. Without hesitation, they smashed the side windows of Claudia's Porsche. The sound of glass shattering echoed down the street, a loud, satisfying crack that felt like justice itself being served. As the water hose was shoved through the broken windows and connected to the hydrant, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. This wasn't just about a car anymore, it was about everything that had built up. The rules being ignored, the entitlement, the frustration that had been simmering for months. In one swift move, the firefighters turned Claudia's arrogance into rubble. Her precious car was now just another casualty in the name of public safety, a stark reminder that sometimes actions have consequences, but that wasn't the end of it. Oh no. The real spectacle was just about to unfold. As the water gushed from the hose, dousing the flames that were quickly spreading in the neighbor's house, Claudia appeared. She stormed out of her front door like a woman possessed, her silk robe flapping behind her like a cape. Her face was flushed with rage, and her eyes darted around frantically as if she couldn't comprehend what was happening. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked at the firefighters, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "That's my car, stop." "You can't do this!" Her arms flailed wildly as she tried to block the hose, as if her physical presence could somehow stop the water from flowing. Her behavior was outlandish, to say the least. Neighbors, who had gathered in clusters along the street to watch, were now taking out their phones, recording every second of her meltdown. The scene was almost comical, with Claudia screaming about property rights and insurance claims, completely oblivious to the fact that there was an actual fire just down the street. One of the firefighters glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, move aside before you get sprayed," he said, his tone calm but firm. But Claudia wouldn't back down. She screamed even louder, her voice rising in pitch, demanding to know who would pay for the damage to her car. She was drowning in her own sense of entitlement, unable to grasp the gravity of the situation. The fire was still raging, but all she could think about was her precious Porsche. The crowd of neighbors began to chuckle, unable to suppress their amusement. Phones clicked and buzzed as the footage of Claudia's tantrum began to spread. In that moment, she wasn't the self-assured HOA president anymore. She was just another ridiculous figure in a community that had grown tired of her arrogance. And then, just as the firefighters worked methodically to put out the flames, Claudia's car became the star of the show. The Porsche, once a symbol of her power and superiority, now lay in ruin. The windows were shattered, the leather seats drenched in water, and the shiny hood was marred by the force of the hose. It wasn't just a luxury vehicle anymore, it was a casualty of Claudia's own making. The fire was eventually brought under control, and as the firefighters packed up, the fire captain walked over to Claudia, who was still fuming in her robe. He handed her a card with the city's insurance information, his face unreadable. "Next time, don't block a hydrant," he said, his voice steady. The neighbors erupted into applause, the sound of clapping echoing down the street. Phones were held high, capturing every second of Claudia's humiliation. There she stood, in the middle of it all, her Porsche destroyed and her reputation in tatters. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Claudia had finally learned a lesson the hard way. Her arrogance had been brought down in front of the whole neighborhood, and she could do nothing but stand there, red-faced and defeated. But this wasn't the end of the story. Oh no, not by a long shot. Because even though Claudia's ego had taken a serious hit, her pride wasn't going to let her go down without a fight. What happened next would set the stage for a battle unlike any other. The day after the fire, it seemed like the dust had barely settled when Claudia Hartwell started plotting her revenge. It was as if the entire neighborhood had just witnessed an unforgettable spectacle, but for her, the humiliation wasn't enough. Claudia wasn't the type to back down, and if there was one thing we all knew, it was that she never admitted when she was wrong. Instead of retreating quietly and reflecting on the consequences of her actions, she geared up for a battle. By noon the next day, Claudia had already taken to Facebook, posting an outrage-filled rant for all to see. She was seething, her words dripping with venom as she vowed to sue the fire department and the city for damages to her car. Her post was long, dramatic, and filled with accusations of reckless destruction and property terrorism. She claimed that her precious Porsche had been mutilated by the firefighters without justification, completely ignoring the fact that they had been trying to save a house from burning down. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood, the rest of us were watching with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck unfold. Every single neighbor who had been there the day before, whether they'd watched from their windows or stood in the street recording her meltdown, was now whispering in hushed tones, savoring the drama. Some joked that Claudia's next big move would be to take the firefighters to small claims court for the pain and suffering her car had endured. The comments were rolling in on Facebook, half of them supportive, the other half mocking her without mercy. There was something satisfying about watching her double down on her ridiculous behavior. But Claudia didn't stop there. She showed no remorse, no recognition that she might have pushed the limits of acceptable behavior. Fueled by her arrogance, she went from one rant to the next, making sure everyone knew she was on a mission to right this wrong. The woman had more pride than sense, and it was clear that she wasn't going to let the embarrassment of the day before be the final chapter. She was now in full revenge mode, and I wasn't sure what would be worse, the damage to her car or the damage to her already fragile reputation. Then, the inevitable happened. Claudia filed a lawsuit against the fire department and the city. She showed up at the courthouse armed with a massive binder of evidence, photos of her car, screenshots of her social media posts, and even a printed copy of the HOA handbook. She was acting as though the HOA bylaws somehow trumped everything, including basic safety regulations. The idea that a fire truck should have waited for her to move her car simply because she couldn't be bothered to park it legally seemed to be at the heart of her delusion. She claimed that the firefighters had targeted her car on purpose. It was almost laughable how entitled she sounded, like the world was supposed to bend to her every whim. In the courtroom, she was the star of the show. And not in a good way. As she walked in, with her binder full of documents, she looked like a character out of a courtroom drama, full of righteous indignation and a thirst for revenge. The judge, however, didn't share her sense of drama. The fire department's legal team, on the other hand, was prepared. They had come with a clear defense. They presented body cam footage from the firefighters, showing the moment they arrived and immediately saw the Porsche blocking the hydrant. The footage made the entire situation clear. There was no time to waste. Firefighters don't wait for people to move their cars. They act, and they act quickly. The footage was crystal clear, and it was hard to argue with the urgency they had faced. The judge listened, and you could see the frustration on her face as Claudia continued to speak. There was a moment of silence, followed by a slight shake of the head. Finally, the judge spoke. "Ms. Hartwell," she said, her voice calm but laced with a hint of disbelief, "you've wasted the court's time. This case is dismissed. And I'm warning you, if you continue to file frivolous lawsuits, you will be fined." Claudia stood there, her jaw clenched, unable to process what had just happened. The judge didn't even entertain her arguments. The case was over before it even started, and the courtroom, which had been so tense moments before, was now filled with a collective sigh of relief. Some of the people in the gallery even snickered, and I could hear a few quiet claps from the audience. It was clear Claudia had been humiliated in the most public way possible. She wasn't just defeated in court, she was laughed out of it, but Claudia wasn't done. She wasn't ready to accept her defeat and fade into the background. Instead, she became a viral sensation. Her courtroom defeat was plastered all over social media, with videos of her speaking in court, whining about the fire department, and even photos of her ranting outside the courthouse. People took those videos and turned them into memes, complete with exaggerated captions and slow-motion replays of her most ridiculous moments. Claudia had become the punchline of the community, and the memes were getting more and more creative by the hour. Her frustration only seemed to fuel the ridicule. She went from being an HOA president to being the laughingstock of the county. Despite all the public humiliation, Claudia refused to back down. She didn't see her actions as a mistake. In her mind, she was the victim, and she had been wronged. The more the community mocked her, the harder she tried to retaliate. She posted more rants on Facebook, started making videos where she spoke about how the system was out to get her, and tried to gather support from anyone who would listen. But the more she protested, the more she cemented her place as the neighborhood joke. Her attempts at revenge were futile. Every protest, every rant, just dug her deeper into a hole. It was clear to everyone watching that she had lost the respect of the community, and her dignity along with it. In the end, Claudia didn't just lose her car. She lost her credibility, her reputation, and her power in the neighborhood. The fire department had taught her a valuable lesson, not just about parking, but about entitlement and humility. She thought she could challenge public safety and get away with it, but she couldn't have been more wrong. And as for the neighborhood, it was a reminder that no matter how much power someone has, they can always fall. Sometimes the most humiliating losses come not from external forces, but from one's own arrogance. And that lesson? Well, it was learned the hard way.